Hi, I'm Ken. We've been diving a little deep recently, and today we're going to keep it really simple. Last week we talked about those Australian Kangaroo and Map stamps in my collection. We talked about how they were issued around the same time as those King George V stamps from Australia, but we didn't spend any time on those. Today we're going to give those stamps their due. I've tucked the stamps that Roger sent me onto this page. I also added 2 stamps that I got from the Spelman Museum. I'm making progress here. I did a search in the Stanley Gibbons catalog for these shade variations on the 2 shilling stamps. I didn't find any mention of them. I've got some more research to do there, I think. While these roos were the first stamps of Australia, the King George designs were released in that very same year. In the last video, we went through how this design was the preferred design of the political party that favored loyalty to the King, George V. These stamps were in use for well over 20 years, along with those Kangaroo and Map stamps. Over the 23 years that these stamps were issued, there were a number of variations largely around colors and watermarks. You can see from this table that stamps were issued with 4 different watermarks and even unwatermarked. There were also 2 surcharged versions of these stamps, and if you look at that first column, there's also the first stamp of this design, also unwatermarked, but with a slightly different design. This is the first stamp issued in that series. It's Scott number 17, issued in 1913. Let's compare that to the later design. The stamp on the right is the first stamp, the one we just saw. Can you see the differences between it and the one issued the next year? Sure, the perforations are different and the shade is slightly different. And the first stamp has no watermark. The second one has that crown over the A watermark. But there's a ton of little design differences between these 2 stamps. Can you see any of them yet? The easiest one for me to see is the back of the kangaroo on the left side. In the first design, the kangaroo's back is white. In the later designs, the back of the kangaroo is shaded. It's obvious now, I bet. Besides that, the kangaroo's tail is longer and his knees point up. The jewels on the crown are drawn differently. The flowers and leaves along the top look completely different, although they're laid out the same. The emu is skinnier, the letters in the 1 penny are outlined in the first design, and there's a thicker outline around most of the head. Like I said, there's a ton of differences now that you know what to look for. I bet you can see others that I didn't mention. For the rest of the stamps, identification can be a little trickier. But honestly, these are way easier to identify than those Kangaroo and Map stamps. I'll walk you through them. Let's go column by column. We did the first column already. That's just the first stamp with the lighter backed kangaroo and the other design differences we just talked about. The next column has the new designs starting in 1914. The way you can tell these stamps is by the watermark. Remember all these watermarks from the Kangaroo and Map stamps? Those first 3 are kind of hard to tell apart. That's not a problem with these King George stamps though. The King George stamps use just these watermarks. Notice that the 2 confusing watermarks, number 8 and 10, are gone. All we have left are the single crown watermark 9, the multiple crown watermark 11, the multiples of the crown and A, that's watermark 203, and the multiples with the C of A letters, that's 228. Let's simplify this chart. These watermarks are all easy to tell apart. Our second column is the stamps with watermark 9, that single crown over the A. These are my stamps with that watermark 9. From here, it looks like it might be simple to tell the various stamps apart. There's a lot of colors and denomination differences to help narrow it down. Look at these. There are 3 different colors for the 1 penny stamps, red, purple, and green. Unfortunately, you can't go by color alone. These 3 stamps are all reds, but with 3 different denominations. You can see that now. You need both the color and the denomination to tell stamps in this series apart. Okay now, look again. Straightforward enough? No? Yeah, you got me. There are 2 copies of the 1 penny red. There also seem to be 2 copies of both the 2 penny orange and the 2 penny red. Those 2 penny stamps are just minor color differences. They're a little hard to tell apart in a video, but those aren't too hard in real life. I don't think you'll have any problem with them. They're nothing like those crazy British Edward VII stamps. But let's take a closer look at the 1 penny reds. Look at that line on my table for Scott number 21. Besides the normal stamp, there's variations labeled A through F. That's a total of 7 different stamps for this one catalog number. My 2 are just shade differences. There are reds, carmines, scarlets, a rose red, and a bright rose shade. My stamps are the red and the carmine. But there's something more interesting to look for in these stamps. The first stamp is type 1. I'm showing just the line behind the emu on this stamp to distinguish it from the type 2 stamp on the right. This type 1 stamp, the regular stamp, has a white line, then a red one. Compare that to the type 2 stamp, which is white, red, white. Most of the 1 penny stamps are the type 1 stamps. Only one stamp, the 21C, shows the type 2 design like on the right. I'm showing the line behind the emu as the distinguishing detail, partly because it's the easiest for me to see, and partly because it's the only difference that the Scott catalog lists. The Stanley Gibbons catalog doesn't mention this difference at all, though. Instead, it shows other differences between the two types. Stanley Gibbons notes that type 2 has a thick line around the head, and there's a scratch mark on the king's neck. Finally, on either side of the denomination tablet is a vertical white line. I think it's interesting that different catalogs mention different variations for this same stamp. Both are true, but it can make collecting these a little confusing. Like I said, there's only one stamp that shows these type 2 characteristics, and it's reasonably expensive, cataloging at $35. That's stamp 21C. The rest of the stamps are either type 1 or type 1A. Type 1A is just like type 1, except it has a little white spur at the bottom of the left denomination tablet. That little spur of the type 1A shows up in a number of stamps, including 21B and the green 1 penny stamp 67A. I'm not telling you this to make it more complicated, but to help you know what to look for in the variants you're most likely to come across. Specialists have looked at every detail of these stamps, and there are so many variants. Most you'll never find and probably don't care about at our level. But these type 1A and type 2 stamps are common enough that you should look out for them. And I want you to know how to identify them when you get some of these stamps. Some of these are only described in words in the catalogs, and I think it helps to see a picture of them. They're really easy to identify once you know what to look for. Next, these are the stamps with watermark 11. That's the watermark with the multiple larger crowns. There are just 4 stamps with this watermark, 5 if you count the color variant of the 1.5 penny stamp. One is chocolate and the other is red-brown. They're very similar, but not hard to tell apart once you have both in your hands. So far, I have just these 3 stamps in my collection. Next, we have just 2 stamps listed in the 1924 column. Neither of these have a watermark. The only other stamp in this series without a watermark is the first one. Even those 2 surcharge stamps have a watermark, although I can't remember which one, since they're so easy to identify by the overprint alone. I don't have any of these 2 unwatermarked stamps to show you yet, although there's really nothing different to see about them. They don't have anything on the back and they look the same on the front. The next column has stamps with watermark 203. That's also a multiple crown and A watermark. That's why I'm showing you both watermark 11 and 203 together. They are so obviously different in the picture, but the words alone might be a little confusing. Besides some more obvious color variations in this column, there's a few common stamp types to look out for here too. First, let's take a look at the 2 penny types. The stamps with watermark 9 in that second column all use the first die type. In that first die, the 2 highlighted parts of the number 2 are very thin. On the stamps with watermark 203, those same parts of the number 2 are much thicker. You might be thinking, well, who cares? The watermark is enough to tell the difference, and you'd be mostly right, except there's one unexpected variant, stamp 70A, with the 203 watermark and the type 1 die. It's common enough to check for, and it catalogs for about $29, so it's worth looking for. Next, we have 2 die types for the 3 penny stamps. The same thing is going on here. The earlier series uses die 1, and the later series uses die 2. Except that number 72A uses the earlier die, die 1. There are 2 things to look for in the 3 penny die. First, the number itself is thinner like that 2 penny die. And second, the background lines of the die 1 blend into the back of the kangaroo. Again, the pictures make it obvious. Finally, the 5 penny die also has a type difference. The top of the 5 is curved in the first series and it's flat in the later series. You really never have to check for these. The watermark is enough to identify the stamps, although if you find a curved 5, you know it's from the earlier series. If you find a flat 5, it could be either from watermark 203 or the last series, watermark 228. We'll get to that in a moment. As for my collection, I just have 4 stamps with the 203 watermark. In the next column, there are 2 stamps with value surcharges. This is my stamp with the 2 pence surcharge. There's another one very similar with a 5 pence surcharge. I don't have that one yet. These are common enough and trivial to identify, and we can move on. And now for the final column of these stamps, we have the last watermark. It's like watermark 203, but instead of a pattern of A's and crowns, the letters show C of A for Commonwealth of Australia. There's nothing special going on with these stamps. They're really pretty easy to identify just by the watermark and the denomination. There's no color variations or special types here. These are my stamps from that series. I'm halfway done with these so far. I want to show one other common variant of these stamps that might otherwise be a little confusing. These 2 stamps are official stamps. The first one uses perins. Those are little holes cut into the stamp. They show the letters OS and indicate that they're official stamps. You might be used to seeing these kind of perins on stamps from the US and Great Britain. For those countries, perins indicate that the stamps are exclusively for use by a specific company. It was a way to prevent employee theft. Australia used perins for private companies in the same way, but they also used them for official stamps and some state official stamps. These official stamps come with either perins or they're overprinted with OS. I really don't collect official stamps, so I don't have my own copies of these stamps. Well, maybe I do in an envelope somewhere, but I don't pay any attention to them. Anyway, if you're looking for copies of the regular stamp and you find one of these OS perins, you should at least know that they aren't the same as those regular issue stamps. Officially. And that's it for our overview of those King George V stamps. I think they are a little tricky in some places, but now that you've seen pictures of what to look for, it should be fairly straightforward. I think that these stamps are really nice, nice design, consistent with the time. Although I must admit, I really prefer those Roo and Map stamps much better than these King George stamps, although they're both fun to collect. You should have everything you need now to collect both sets of those. And so dive in and collect some Australian stamps. Before we go, I want to thank a few people who have sent me some stuff recently. Let's start out by thanking Tristan. Tristan from 3 Stone Stamps sent me this card, which Tristan hand wrote with a fountain pen on his channel over on Instagram. 3 Stone Stamps Philately. 3 Stone Stamps Philately, I think it's pronounced. Tristan does some fantastic work over there, so if you haven't seen his channel on Instagram, go take a look. Tristan was on the lookout for Sower on a Hill stamp that I was looking for. This is it. Tristan sent this lovely stamp to me. I really appreciate this. Besides that Sower on a Hill stamp that I had desperately needed for my collection, Tristan also sent along these stamps from Switzerland. These are all definitive issues, and I just love definitive issues, and these are going to be a great addition to my collection. Anyway, thank you, Tristan. I really appreciate that. John from Great Britain, a great supporter of the channel, especially of my work on identifying King Edward VII stamps, sent me along a bunch of stamps here, a bunch of packets. Let's see if we can get these on camera. A bunch of packets of stamps featuring King Edward VII. These are some fantastic stamps, and I have been wildly off in a dark area checking these out under ultraviolet light to get the same kind of analysis on these that I did with some of the lower values. I am not going to share that detail with you now. Maybe someday it'll come up again. But anyway, John has been quite a patron to the channel, and I really appreciate you sending along these stamps. Next, what do we have? We have Michael from Canada. Michael went to Toronto's oldest post office. It's a museum now, but I think it's still a post office. In fact, I'm sure it's still a post office. Michael sent me some literature from there, some postcards, but he also sent along this envelope here, which included this bear stamp from Canada. I think this is just a fantastic stamp, and you can see right here the cancel from Toronto's oldest post office in Canada. Michael, thank you very much. I really appreciate thinking of me here. Thank you.